Hey, welcome to the TCPalm editorial board meeting to interview candidates in the election for 19th Judicial Circuit Judge, Group 1. I'm Larry Reisman, columnist and community editor, and I'm joined by fellow editorial board members Adam Neal, our editor and news director, and Blake Fontenay, our columnist. Special thanks to candidates Christian Van Riper and Rebecca White for meeting with us today and streamlining this process by completing questionnaires ahead of time. Board members have reviewed them. Questionnaires and replays of our editorial board interviews can be found soon at tcpalm.com/elections. At the conclusion of this interview, editorial board members will discuss possibly writing an editorial to recommend a candidate in this race. I'll lead the questioning and open it up to Adam and Blake at the end. We might end up having more of a conversation than just a simple Q&A. Our goal is to be completed in 45 minutes. Because of our time constraints, we ask that you keep your answers concise. And then I'll start off, we'll start with Christian first, and then we'll go with Rebecca second, and then back and forth. And we'll go from there. So the first question I have, we'll start with Mr. Van Riper, is what do you think is the most important asset a circuit judge can have, and how are you prepared to provide that?
Well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you to TCPalm and the editorial board. Thank you, Mr. Reisman, for taking care of all the technical yesterday. And thank you to my opponent, Ms. White, for participating in this. I think it's helpful that the public out there knows as much as they can about the candidates, specifically in judicial races, who I think sometimes go overlooked, and the public doesn't know as much about the candidates that they're choosing in such a race. But I think that the question specifically that was asked is about the most important qualification that a judge should have, and I think it's just fairness and objectivity. It's kind of a standard response, I think, that should be obvious to most people who are considering this position, is that everybody starts from the same starting line. There's no disparity in the legal system based on economic status or racial status or gender. It's that everybody starts at the same starting line, and everybody finishes at the same goalposts. So to be short and to try and be short and sweet to answer the questions quickly so that we can get through the questions, I think that is by far the most important qualification for a judge.
Thank you. Mrs. White, would you want me to repeat the question, or do you have a good sense of what I'm asking?
I wrote it down. So obviously, fairness is the most important thing. A judge needs to be able to listen to both sides. You need to be a good listener, paying attention, and in order to treat everyone that comes in front of them fairly. Everyone that comes in front of the court has an opportunity to say what they feel that they need to do to present their case, and then the judge needs to be able to rule based on the law. And that's the thing that all judges are charged with, and what I have been doing since I took the bench over a year ago is everyone that comes before me is treated fairly. I listen to everything they have to say and then make my ruling based on the law.
Okay, thank you. We'll start with you then. As a judge being on the bench, can you discuss if you have a judicial philosophy and what that might be in as plain English as possible?
Yes. My judicial philosophy is that the law is what's written. As the judge, when I put on my black robe, I take a few seconds and just think, okay, what Rebecca thinks no longer matters. It's what the law says. And that's what I have to do. My personal feelings about a subject or a case that comes in front of me doesn't matter. It's what the law says. And it is how it is written. I'm not charged as the judge to make the law. That's done in Tallahassee. My job is simply to rule fairly and to give everyone an opportunity to be heard and to apply the law as it is written.
Okay. Mr. Van Riper, would you like me to repeat the question, or?
Judicial philosophy. Am I muted? No, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
the judicial philosophy, mine would be that the judge's job is not to make law or to stretch the law to fit some personal or political opinion that I might have. In fact, I might have to make decisions that I personally might not agree with how the law fits the facts of a particular case, the facts and circumstances of a particular case. But it's my job to follow the law and interpret the law as it was intended to be interpreted by the legislature. And there are some some tools out there that judges use to help interpret the law, that being case law, decisions made from higher courts by other judges in the past that help us to interpret the law. But the judge's job is to, again, not make law, but to apply the law as it's written to the facts of a case and use the tools that are out there to help interpret the law in the way that it was intended to be interpreted.
Okay. Next question, Mr. Van Riper, we'll start with you. How would you describe what would be your judicial temperament?
Can you repeat that? You're kind of breaking up a little bit.
Sure. How would you describe what would be your judicial temperament?
I think that from practicing law for 16 years, you kind of you see various versions of what that means, temperament, from various judges. Some judges that all lawyers know that they're hesitant to go before because they believe that their temperament isn't professional. But I think that's the most important thing: is to be professional, to be courteous, to be those things to both the attorneys and the litigants that come before the court. There's no reason to. Much like the situation where your personal opinion doesn't really factor into judicial philosophy, your personal feelings ought not, factor into your temperament in the courtroom. If you're having a bad day, or if there's something about a particular attorney or litigant that you feel a certain way outside the courtroom, you shouldn't bring that into the courtroom. Everybody should be treated professionally and with courtesy when they come into the courtroom. That doesn't mean that they'll agree with the decisions that I may make, but it still means that they should be treated, with professionalism and courtesy.
Okay, thanks. Ms. White?
Thank you. My temperament is that I treat everyone with respect, and I'm very patient with all parties to allow them all to have the opportunity to speak. I have 4 children who have taught me great patience. It is something an experience that I can't describe, but it is definitely something that has taught me patience. And that is something that I take in consideration when I'm in court, because even though both parties are not going to agree with my rulings, quite often someone is going to lose. I want to make sure though, if those were my kids, would I think that the judge though listened to them and treated them fairly? And that's what I try to do. Even if the outcome might not be what they want it to be, at least I want the people that come in front of me to know that I treated them with respect and fairly. So I do exercise patience and respect and for everyone to make sure that no one ever feels rushed in my courtroom and that they are all always heard.
Thank you. We'll start with you, Ms. White. Is there a judge, we just talked about judicial temperament. Is there a judge that you've practiced before that you would like to emulate?
Well, there's so many judges. I was with the state attorney's office for over 14 years, and I tried over 100 jury trials, and I had an opportunity to practice in front of so many judges. There are people that I would like to take their knowledge of the law. There's different people that I would like to take the patience that they showed the people in front of them, that I can't narrow it down to just one. So I just say that I just try to take the best from all the judges I've been in front of and apply that every day in my courtroom.
Mr. Van Riper, is there a judge or judges that you would like to emulate?
Again, I think both myself and Ms. White, we've been practicing for enough of a period of time that we've both been in front of many judges, and you see things in front of you're practicing for that long in front of judges that you would like to emulate. I wouldn't narrow it down to one specific individual because there are many good judges and there are many aspects of their judicial style, or the way they handle cases, or the way they treat people professionally, or the way they keep an open mind and listen. That from various judges have some of each of those qualities that I just mentioned, and so I think I would take from various judges. I've also worked. When I was in law school, I was an intern and a clerk for the Florida Supreme Court. So I got the opportunity to work with the highest judges in the state of Florida in that court. And, I can recall just the breadth of knowledge that they had and the professionalism that they exhibited being something that I would strive to emulate.
Okay, Mr. Van Riper, have you noticed any kind of racial disparity in the courts you practice on have you noticed any racial disparity in the circuit? And if so, how would you resolve those issues?
Well, I think statistics bear that there is. I mean, they're widely reported statistics that show that there is a disparity. However, my ability to point the finger at one specific reason for that, I can't say I have that ability. I cannot say that I practiced in front of a specific judge where I thought that there was a conscious or subconscious mindset towards making a decision for some inappropriate basis based on race. But I can say that based on the statistics that we see, it's happening, and I think that it happens for various reasons. One is that a judge in circuit court or county court, for that matter, oftentimes the sentences that they're imposing are not the result of the judge's decision. They're the result of plea bargains that the judge is in court accepting a plea and accepting a sentence that both parties have agreed to. I think that there are reasons that are societal in terms of a disproportionate amount of people based on race that come to court in the first place. If you take the population and you look at the breakdown of it, I think that you'd find that there are more people coming to court in the first place that may be minorities than one would think, given the demographics. So there are reasons that I think that are hard to put your finger on for why that may be. But I do believe, I'll give you an example. When I was a prosecutor, I had made a mistake about the status of particular case law. And I was in front of Judge Larry Shack at the time. And I was probably about a year out of law school, pretty fresh, pretty green. And I went back to the office, and the judge had made the incorrect ruling, I believe, because I didn't provide him with the correct case law at the time. And so I went back to the office. I scurried to research and find the accurate case law, and I found it. And the next day, trial was about to start in a case that I was handling. And so I had the uncomfortable position of going back in front of Judge Shack and delaying the trial to say, look, we've got to reopen this hearing that we had yesterday and reconsider it, because I think that I informed the court of the case law that wasn't correct. And here's the right case law. And as I put my head down waiting for him to scold me, he didn't do that. He actually said, Mr. Van Riper, the buck stops here with me. I should have realized that this was the correct case law. And I thought that was it kind of goes back to the question about, the type of demeanor that a judge should have in court. And I've remembered that since that time, but I think that same mentality, the buck stops here, kind of also involves the question you're asking right now, which is, if we want to, point our fingers at what the reasons might be for racial disparity, ultimately, to some extent, the buck stops here with the judge in the courtroom, and maybe exercising some practices that might help a judge determine if there is some type of systemic disparity in the results and sentencing that are happening in this courtroom. So I think that a judge should be aware and should try and do what they can to make sure that that doesn't happen in their courtroom, to what extent that's possible.
Thank you. Mrs. White, Same question. Have you noticed any racial disparities in the circuit? And if so, how would you endeavor to rectify those?
What I can tell you is what has come before me. And I can tell you as a prosecutor, that was not something I ever considered, the person's race. So I looked at what the facts of the case were, what the law was, and was there a crime? And that's how I would make the decision on whether or not to file the case. It did not matter who the person was. It was what the facts were and what the law was. And I can tell you as a judge, it still doesn't matter. It's not something that I consider at all. All people that come in front of me are treated as individuals, but they are not treated differently because of their race. That is not a factor in any decision I make. It is once again still what the facts are and what the law is. And so I can only speak from my own personal experience, and that is not something that has ever factored into any of my decision making, nor would it ever affect me.
Thank you. Okay, Mrs. White, let's talk about some experience question here. What would you say is the most complicated case you've handled as either a judge or an attorney?
Well, I mean, as a judge, I've had to handle multiple different civil motions that are involving Daubert hearings and things, but I think the most complicated thing would still have to go back to when I was a prosecutor, and it was a first-degree murder case. There were two co-defendants, and it involved Daubert motions involving DNA, and there is scientific evidence dealing with DNA and everything that I had to basically, while I am definitely not a scientist, had to become very familiar with that and understanding the math that's involved in that and be able to argue it to the judge so that we'd be able to present that evidence. So that certainly would be the most complicated case that I've ever had to handle in my career.
And just for clarification's sake, what is a Daubert hearing?
Sorry, yes, I should have explained that. That is the standard that allows scientific evidence if it's going to be admissible for the judge to consider. So basically, it's just a legal standard, and there's different factors the judge looks to determine if basically the scientific evidence we're relying on is reliable or not for the jury to be able to hear it. I'm so used to just saying Daubert like everyone knows, which obviously not everyone does know. So sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Van Riper?
Tough to narrow that down, to be honest with you. As a prosecutor, I've handled complicated misdemeanors, right up to complicated felonies. So anything from DUIs, domestic violence, to sexual battery, which is rape cases, to attempted murder, robbery cases. So in the criminal spectrum, I've handled a number of complicated cases, and sometimes what one might think wouldn't be the most complicated case could be a misdemeanor DUI case with very complicated scientific considerations with regard to the breathalyzer machine, where there are expert witnesses involved. So you can have a complicated case that one might not see as a serious case, and yet it's still complicated. There's other versions of considering something quote unquote complicated, like just the complexity that's involved in a family law case, for instance, with complicated emotional positions that each party has. Your client feels one way, their spouse feels another way, and it's very complicated trying to get them to a position where they might resolve their case. So sometimes a family law case, and for also practical reasons, family law cases can also be complicated because you have children involved, you have considerations of time sharing, you have considerations of formulating a parenting plan, you have considerations of assets, real estate, contractual issues that come up. And so family law cases, although they might not be cases that garner the attention of the media, sometimes just a typical family case can be very complicated. So it's hard for me to narrow it down to one. But there are a fair amount of complicated cases that I've handled over the years as an attorney.
Okay, thanks. We'll start with you, Mr. Van Riper, on the next one, which is, can you think of one case that confirms or affirms your decision to have become a lawyer?
It's tough to narrow it down, but I've had several notable cases, and I won't mention very specifically what they involve because I don't want to betray, my client's confidence. But cases that involve children who I personally have felt have been taken out of the care of their parents' custody for too long of a period of time in dependency court, which is cases involving the Department of Children and Families, sometimes removing children, sometimes getting involved in other ways, supervising the parents' custody of their children. But every once in a while, I'll come across a case where I think a child's been, removed from the care of their parent or parents for reasons that I didn't consider to be justified personally. And so, I've set about to try and right that ship and successfully in certain instances. And sometimes when you get a successful result in a case like that, it really kind of brings home that idea to me that this is what I should be doing. So cases involving kids in general, but when I feel like I've done something that has put a family on the right track and allowed a child to be reunified with their family, those are the ones that are most fulfilling.
Thank you. Mrs. White?
Yes. As a prosecutor, I was a member of the South Florida Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. I also prosecuted numerous sexual batteries against children and child molestation. So the opportunities that I had to get justice for those children, to be able to go to trial, have them tell their story, and have when the times that they were found guilty and they knew that someone believed them, that just was always the best cases and the best opportunity that made me feel like this is why I'm a lawyer. I'm serving these children. I'm helping protect the community. And those cases always had the biggest impact on me and affirmed why I went to law school and why I was doing what I was doing.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit, and we'll go with you, Mrs. White, on this one. When did you decide you wanted to become a judge, and why?
Okay, I did not go to law school wanting to be a judge. Actually, I worked at the Advocacy Center for Persons with Disabilities, and I helped parents with children with disabilities advocate for their individual education plans to help the children get the services they were supposed to. And that's what I thought I wanted to do. But my husband and I came here on vacation, and I fell in love with the Treasure Coast. And I told him this is where I wanted to live, and this is where I wanted to raise our family. Unfortunately, at that time in 2007, there weren't any jobs in education law for that kind of law for children with disabilities. So I ended up starting at the state attorney's office, and I ended up loving that too. And I found just a totally different direction for my life that I did not anticipate. And once I started working and serving the public there, I was in front of so many judges with, my 100 jury trials and all the different courtrooms I had moved to, that I saw that I could make a greater impact and serve the community that I love so much by being a judge. And so I started working towards that because I just felt that that's how I could best serve the community. And that's why I put in for the judicial nominating process, which ultimately got me to the spot where I am now of being a circuit court judge.
Thank you, Mr. Van Riper. When did you find out? When did you determine you wanted to be a judge, and what made you want to do that?
I think when I first began considering it was before I was an attorney, but not too long before. I was a child abuse and neglect investigator for the Department of Children and Families before I went to law school. And it kind of relates back to the last question that you asked. That's, and in that job, I had the experience of going to court and seeing how the children in that system, how their lives could be affected one way or the other, usually positively, by the decisions that were made in court. And so that's, I think, when I first began considering it. And I think that I kind of put that idea on the back burner for a while as I became a practicing attorney. And then more recently, in the last several years, I think I've made a decision that I have the experience in the various areas of law, that I have the temperament, and I've also served this community in a public service role as my job as an investigator, and that's my job as a prosecutor. And I was also a prosecutor, a certified legal intern, which is a prosecutor essentially while you're in law school, practicing under a licensed attorney prosecutor. On the west coast of Florida, I went to law school at Stetson. So I think just recently I've decided that I believe I have the qualifications and I have the temperament to do, to seek this position.
And what led you, in terms of the timing and the race, Mr. Van Riper, what led you to file for this position as opposed to, say, trying to seek or seeking an appointment or running in a different race?
Well, I believe that I'm the most qualified candidate for this position based on the fact that I have experience across the various areas of law: family law, criminal law, dependency law, contractual law, sometimes as it relates to family law, real estate law, sometimes as it relates to family law. My firm also practices defense-based law, which my partner actually heads up that division, which is an area of law which is kind of unknown, but it's actually an area of law that helps clients, many of whom are veterans, achieve benefits that they're entitled to after they've been hurt overseas. So my partner handles that area of law, but I help him in the preparation of cases like that. And my time serving as a prosecutor, I think, also where I hone trial skills, I hone motion practice skills. And so, for those reasons, I think that I'm the most qualified candidate for this position. And one thing that I strongly believe in is that the framers of our Florida Constitution, of the law in the state, intended for circuit court judges to not be always political appointments, that they should be elected by the people in the community. I firmly believe that if members of my community might have to face me and the decisions that I make that could drastically affect their lives, then I should have to face them first. The judges should, as a matter of course, and it shouldn't be typical that many of the judges, which is the case in our circuit, never faced an election. They've been appointed and never been run against, and so that's a pretty important concept in my mind.
Thank you. Ms. White, how did you end up? I know you applied for this and now you're running again, and you got appointed, but what led you to this particular seat as opposed to, say, running the first time or seeking? I think you sought the county judge at one point as well. So what sort of led you to this specific spot?
Well, something I want to explain is that, because a lot of people are not familiar with the Judicial Nominating Commission's process, which I wasn't before I put in for it, actually. I understood basically what they do, but I mean, I spent my career as a state employee the entire time. So I wasn't able to write a big check in order to get this position or anything. What happened for me to get this is that the local Judicial Nominating Commission interviewed people, lawyers, people in the legal community, and vetted me. They have gone through to determine how I was before I took the bench, professionally and personally, extensively, both here, and then they made recommendations to Tallahassee, which Tallahassee, also the Governor's General Counsel's office, vetted me too. So I've been extensively vetted both here and in Tallahassee before I got this position. And I did not just take this as a position. I put in for it, like I stated before, because I thought this could be a way that I can continue to serve. And I have had over 100 jury trials. I understand the rules of evidence. I've had to balance a huge docket. I was the supervisor for the misdemeanor division in St. Lucie County, which is our circuit's largest division. It handles 5,000 cases a year. So I understand the importance and know how to balance a large docket. And those experiences have allowed me to take on this position that I've had. So I went through the process originally, and I thought that that was a good way to do it. I was able to get into the general counsel's office due to what people, my other opposing counsels, other people in the legal community said about me before, and then they interviewed us, obviously, and that is how I got this position. And I put in for it because I thought that it'd be a way that I could continue to serve the community.
Thank you. Speaking, you sort of gave me a good segue to go into the next question, which gets back to case management. The whole pandemic put a big backlog in the system. But how, as a judge, how as a judge do you or would you improve the whole, getting cases through the system in a fair way? How do you do that?
Well, I can tell you that's something that I have actually been able to do. I noticed that there was an issue in Okeechobee, where I'm currently assigned, that there was an issue in the civil docket. So when I came on, I ran the numbers and saw the large docket for the civil cases. And that means that people are every day don't know what's going on with their cases. If the cases are dragging on for years, there's been no resolution. And the citizens deserve to have a resolution to their case. And I understand that the courtroom does not belong to me, it belongs to the people. So the first thing I did was see what I could do for the people. And within my first year, I've been able to reduce the civil docket in Okeechobee by half. So we started at over 700 cases and we're down to only 330. So I'm very proud of that. That gives resolution, that gives people access to the courts, which is what they're able to do. Another thing I've been able to do to keep the cases moving is, since I am in Okeechobee, and since 19th Circuit obviously is Indian River, Okeechobee, St. Lucie, and Martin counties. So many of our attorneys do come from other counties. So I still do have Zoom for many of the cases, which allows people to be able to still work in their other courtrooms or work in their office and not have to drive out to Okeechobee. And I've been able to utilize Zoom to get our cases to continue to move. And it's really been successful, especially out there, to give people fairness and allow people to get their cases resolved and get the representation that they want. So those are just a couple of things that I've actually been able to do since taking the role.
Okay, Mr. Van Riper, you've handled a big caseload as an attorney. How would you use that background to improve the process at the circuit judge level?
Well, the legal system, I think, just inherently is kind of steeped in tradition. So there kind of is a tendency to have some backlash or fight against some type of new development. I think that we're all pretty familiar with and on board in the legal system with the idea of using remote technology, video technology, to conduct court hearings. So I don't think I would be some pioneer at this point if I were to say that's what we should do, because I think that's what we are doing. And I think that's what we're going to continue to do. But, it took a pandemic for that to happen. And I don't think it should, attorneys, myself maybe included in the past, judges, and there's a tendency to not want to implement something that might be helpful because it's new and it's unfamiliar. But I think that going forward, we should find new ways to use the technology that we've now been forced to use because of the pandemic to make the court system more efficient. It shouldn't take a pandemic for us to have to use this type of technology. And I think that we should try and get rid of that type of mentality, that we should experiment with things technological speaking, and if something doesn't work, then you can pull it back or change it, but, always be focused on, ways that we can make the court system function more efficiently. And the technology that's been used because of the pandemic, I think, has been a godsend. And it's funny, in certain areas of law, I think that the dockets moved more efficiently because the parties started using Zoom. And so you didn't have, 30 attorneys crowding a courtroom with their clients. Instead, they're all there remotely, and attorneys could be more efficient that way. And a big thing too is that, when an attorney's sitting in court, he's charging his client what an attorney charges a client for sitting in court for 2 hours when really the hearing is 5 minutes. So it's not fair to the client. And so this system, as it's been implemented, has been more fair and more cost effective for clients as well.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to open it up to Adam and Blake. Do you guys have any questions?
I have a couple, if Adam doesn't mind me going first. um, the first question I have is actually for both of the candidates. You've both spent time as prosecutors, and you're going to be in a different role as a judge if elected. So tell us a little bit about how you sort of put aside looking at things through the prism of a prosecutor and evaluate a case from both sides.
I think Mr. Van Riper's first on this one.
Okay. Well, I'll give you an example of when I was a prosecutor, how I was able to kind of evaluate cases, I think, differently than some of my colleagues at the time. I liked it when I was just starting as a prosecutor. We had a supervisor, and he would repeat the mantra, "Do the right thing." That was his only guidance, basically. You know, all the technical and practical issues we figured them out as we went, but you know, the mindset of do the right thing was always on his mind, and he always relayed that to us and how important that was. So not to do the thing that, you know, is the most harsh in any particular case or the most lenient, but do the right thing for a particular given case. But I had a case once as a prosecutor, and I was kind of in the office a little less than a year, I think, and my supervisor, who I respect, but he had moved to another division, a higher up division, and he had handed me several of his cases. And as a young prosecutor just starting off in felony, you're eager to get those more serious cases, which I was at the time. And so the case was the case of, I believe he was 15 years old, no more than 16, but I believe he was a 15-year-old. And he had been charged with 2 counts of robbery with a firearm. And the story behind the case was his brother was a well-known gang member in St. Lucie County. And at that time, there in the state attorney's office, there was a unit in major crimes that they had developed. They may still have it, that focuses on gang-related crime. And so the supervisor who gave me the case he moved to that unit. And there was some issues with the case. The main issue was that there was a motion to suppress that was filed by the defense. And the issue was whether or not the confession of a person that young was admissible in court, or whether or not it was procured in some illegal manner that violated his constitutional rights. And the law was on the side of the state, so I won that motion to suppress. And so I was at the point in the case where he had no choice but to enter a plea. And mind you, he was 15 at the time. And the crimes were serious. His brother was as I said, was a known gang member. And the situation was his brother basically wanted to indoctrinate him into the gang culture. And so he basically took his younger brother out on the street and he pushed him out of the car with a gun that was actually fake. And it was like a BB gun or a pellet gun that looked real, I believe, if I remember correctly. And he said, "You're going to do this. You're going to man up, so to speak." And that was what he did. And he actually did it twice. So he's facing conviction on 2 charges, which are punishable by life felony. So after I won the motion to suppress, he was really stuck in the position where all he could really do was enter a plea because he admitted everything. And, you know, I had won a motion where the court decided that confession was admissible. And so I went to my boss at the time, my former supervisor, I should say, and I had this big file. It was a pretty complex case. And I said, "What should I ask for at sentencing?" And he looked at me and he said, "Life. Of course, you should ask for life." And that just didn't sit with me. You know, that I said to myself, he's a 15-year-old kid. The crime is serious. He deserves serious punishment, no doubt. You know, I don't want to imply that I think that, you know, he should be given some type of revolving door type sentence, but he should be given a sentence that made the point that he can't do this again. But to lock him up and throw away the key in that particular case, I wasn't going to go in the court and do that. And so I said to my supervisors, "Look, if you want to do that, you have to go in the court yourself and do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to ask for that sentence in this particular case." And, you know, I think of that, and, you know, I probably received some backlash at the time, but I thought that was when I thought back of what's the right thing to do in that particular case. He was a child at the time when the offenses were committed, although prosecuted as an adult, and he didn't have prior, that I can recall, and it didn't sit right with me that was the right thing to do, the right thing to ask for, and so I didn't ask for that. And since the time I've left the prosecutor's office, I've handled a litany of cases on the other side of the spectrum as well. So I think that, I have the right balance to determine when a person deserves, serious punishment and when they don't, and how to be objective and consider things from both sides of the aisle in those kind of cases.
So, what I would say is that, I've been able to use the skills that I have learned at the state attorney's office of docket management. The rules of evidence are the same in civil as they are in criminal. So, but for the past 14 months that I have been a judge, my assignment is family law, civil, dependency, probate, and guardianship. So I do everything but criminal. So I do not do criminal. I've handled hundreds of cases across those different areas of law. And I have been able to use the skills I gained at the state attorney's office, but also just my own desire to see an issue and want to fix it, like I was able to do by tackling the backlog of COVID in civil, but also with dependency. I've started the process of starting a new program called Early Childhood Court, which is a program that they have across the state, but we don't have in the 19th Circuit yet. And it's for children that are in dependency that are under the age of 5. So these children that enter into this program throughout the state, they go to parent-child psychotherapy, and they meet with the court once a month to see how the progress is on their case. And normally in dependency, they wouldn't see a judge that frequently. And throughout the state, they have seen that these children, they reach permanency faster. And just as important, that children that are involved in early childhood court don't return to care as much as children, which means foster care, as much as children who are not in this program. And that is such a huge impact on a child to not have that trauma of a future removal. So I saw this as a problem that children under the age of 5, the trauma that they would face from a removal or from staying in a foster care and not getting to whatever their permanent home is going to be. And they stay in that home longer. And so I looked for a solution. And that's something that I was able to get from the state attorney's office, always trying to do the right thing. It was always pressed upon me. And so this program works out for the best interest of children. And it was something that we're now implementing in Okeechobee and hopefully bringing to the rest of the 19th Circuit.
Thank you both. My next question is directed for Mrs. White, but after she answers, perhaps Mr. Van Rieger can also weigh in with his thoughts about this. Mrs. White, you mentioned on your questionnaire you've been endorsed by the sheriffs within the circuit and at least one of the district attorneys. Now, if you're elected, would you feel at all beholden to them? And how would you deal with that, since they would be involved in sending many of the criminal cases your way, potentially?
Yes, I've also been endorsed by all 4 clerks too in our circuit. So it's in the elected state attorney, all 4 sheriffs, and all 4 clerks. And the reason why they have agreed to endorse me is because they believe in what I've been doing and because of the person that I am. And the person that I am, I can tell you, is that I'm going to do the right thing. I do not feel beholden to anyone. It is my job to apply the law to the facts, no matter who's in front of me. It doesn't matter what status, what person it is. And so I will do what is right because that's what I've always done. And that's what I do on the bench now and what I want to and continue to do. And I appreciate their endorsements and I'm proud to have their endorsements. But obviously my job still is the oath that I take is to uphold the Constitution and to apply the law as it is written, no matter who it is in front of me. And that's what I will continue to do.
Thank you. Mr. Van Riper, any thoughts about that?
I wouldn't comment on Miss White's what she may or may not do based on the endorsement that she don't have. I trust that she would, take each case objectively and fairly as any judge should. So I don't want to say anything that's disparaging about Miss White in relation to this comment. So I don't think it would be appropriate to.
Thank you.
Adam?
No.
No?
Nope, go ahead, Larry.
Okay, maybe we'll just sum it up at this point. We were at the 45-minute mark. We'll start with Mr. Van Riper, since you had the last, since it's your turn. Just the last question, is there anything that we missed? Anything else that you'd like to tell us and tell the audience before we sign off?
I alluded to it. It's for someone seeking elected office, I'm not always as thrilled about just bragging about myself, to be honest. It feels like unnatural. But I think I kind of alluded to it in some of the questions that people should know, is that I grew up here on the Treasure Coast, specifically Martin County. Went to school here locally, went to St. Joseph's Catholic School, went to Stewart Middle School, went to Martin County High School, where I played baseball and basketball, played Little League baseball, basketball, and soccer before that. So I have a strong connection to this community. I feel passionate about this community, and I feel passionate about serving as a public servant in this community, as I have in the past in other capacities. I continued living in Martin County as I went to college at Florida Atlantic University, where I graduated cum laude. And then I moved on. About the only time I was strayed from the Treasure Coast was when I went to law school at Stetson University on the west coast of Florida, and I graduated cum laude there. And then after law school, I came back here and began a career as an attorney in the place where I grew up and the place where I don't expect to leave, frankly. My wife, Melanie, she is actually a natural, a native, Martin County native. She was born in Martin Memorial Hospital, and she now works for that hospital, although it's Cleveland Clinic now, as a pediatric nurse, where she's worked there for, she's going to kill me because I can't remember how long, but it's a long time, over 20 years. The professional experience that I have that I think makes me an excellent candidate for this position. I think I've gone over it already, but I'll just mention some of the highlights. As I said, I was a Department of Children and Families child abuse investigator. It was at that time where I really started to, notice how the legal system can have great drastic effects on the lives of children. A lot of times people assume a child abuse investigator is, in all their cases, are dealing with children who are abused by some terrible or malicious person. But in actuality, more cases than not are probably families that are just, through circumstances that are out of their control, or their children are put in positions where they're at risk of neglect, or just at risk in general. And so those cases were very fulfilling, where you could help a family tweak a few things about their circumstance and then take a child out of that risk. So the other, I think, experience that I have that qualifies me for the position is I was a clerk for the highest court in Florida, the Florida Supreme Court. I should say I was an intern, but it was a clerkship that I got in law school as it was based on excellent academic record. People were chosen for this honor, frankly. And I got to live in Tallahassee and work essentially as a clerk for my last semester of law school instead of going to classes back in Pinellas County, where my law school was. And in that position, I wrote opinions, drafted opinions that were then adopted by the court with the guidance of an actual attorney at the time that was a staff attorney. And so there are opinions out there that were used by the court in their final decision that I had a hand in formulating. So that was great experience getting a handle on a vast areas of law and multiple issues in the law. I happened to have been up there not too long after the whole Gore-Bush thing had occurred, and so there was still kind of a buzz going on in Tallahassee about that. So that was a unique experience. I also, as I said, was a certified legal intern, which is essentially a prosecutor in law school, and that's what I wanted to do right out of law school, and that's what I did do when I came back to serve the Treasure Coast, to serve the 19th Circuit, specifically in Fort Pierce in St. Lucie County. And then as a prosecutor, much like Ms. White, you have the opportunity to be in court every day, to have multiple trials, to have multiple opportunities to hone your skills at motion practice and to hone your skills at the rules of evidence, which is important in the judicial position, because It's important that a judge has a very good handle on evidence and other areas of law, because you're making decisions sometimes right there on the spot. And then after I left the prosecutor's office, I think that this is what really distinguishes me, is that I've had a vast experience, including trials, hearings, motion practice in various areas of law, which I mentioned earlier: family law, contractual law, dependency law, criminal law on the defense side. And so the Defense-Based Act law, which I mentioned my partner practices and I'm involved with. I think that it's one thing with regard to the knowledge and the experience that one can gain from practicing various areas of law. But I think the most important difference between myself and my opponent is that I've had hundreds of clients, and that connection that you make with people, that that ability to relate with a client and who are facing difficult, sometimes impossible situations in their lives, and you're responsible for helping them overcome those situations. I think it's humbling, and I've had hundreds of clients, some with very difficult situations, some with not so difficult situations. But I think that it's important to have the opportunity to relate with people in the types of cases that you'll see before you as a judge, and you've actually handled those type of cases and had relationships with those people as an attorney before becoming a judge. And so for that reason, I hope that that I'm elected for this position. And I'd like to thank Ms. White for attending here today, for being a part of this. I've known her for quite some time. I don't begrudge her, because we're opponents in this race. And I'd like to thank her for coming here today. And I'd like to encourage everybody to come out and vote, because it's a low attendance, type of a situation. There's not too many people that come out and vote, and we should change that, because it's a primary election. You won't see the same amount of people voting in it, but I hope that we can increase those numbers and get people interested in learning about us, the candidates, and actually educating themselves and making an informed decision. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you. Judge White?
Thank you. And I want to thank y'all so much for putting this on for us. I thank y'all for all your time, spending your Thursday night talking to us. I greatly appreciate it. Luckily, in this community, not many people know their local judges, because people are able to resolve their disputes without judicial intervention. But what I can say is that in order to get this position, I was extensively vetted by people here in the legal community. I have been endorsed by the clerks, the sheriffs, and the elected state attorney, who are all involved in the legal community and know what I am doing and are supporting me and want me to be able to continue doing what I'm doing. I have a proven record, because I have been doing this for the last 14 months. I've handled hundreds of cases across all different areas of law. I am, as I stated before, I am the mother of 4 young children, and I want them raised in this wonderful community that I chose to live in. 15 years ago, I fell in love with this community and chose to move here, to raise my kids here, to send them to public school here. And I want to be able to continue to serve. I've been able to reduce the backlog created by COVID-19 pandemic. I'm starting a new program for children, for the benefit of children under the age of 5 in dependency. I have been able to, I've spent my entire career, the entire time I have lived here, even as a child, public service was always in our family. From mission trips as a child, to working at the Advocacy Center for Persons with Disabilities, helping parents of kids with disabilities in law school, to serving as an assistant state attorney for 14 years, almost 14 years, until I took the bench. And so I've continued to serve because I love this community and I believe in this community, and I want to be able to this community to be great for my children to want to return here after they graduate and have them be safe and go to school and feel safe. And these are all things that are important to me and why I've chosen to serve and why I want to continue to serve. And so I thank everyone for their time. And then I humbly ask for y'all's vote on August 23rd.
Well, thank you again. Thank you both again for joining us tonight. And hope everybody out there does go out and vote, learn more about the candidates. You can always go to tcpalm.com/elections to see more about this race and many others. And again, thank you so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.